Well, the RBA is expected to spare mortgage holders another rate hike tomorrow. Business Editor Ross Greenwood joins me right now. Ross, great to see you again. Look, we are seeing inflation come down slightly, but the predictions are that it still might not get back to that target zone, the target band of 2 to 3%, even by the end of 2025. So how confident are you that the RBA is going to hold off on another rate hike tomorrow? And then, what do you think is going to happen next year?
Well, I think there's enough evidence out there right now with inflation having come down more than expected just in this last monthly print that they can wait and have a look and see what the quarterly inflation rate does. That said, there's a real issue in Australia that now inflation has escaped from being purely imported goods and commodities that have risen in price, which is what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine and really disrupted all of the supply chains around the world. Right now, as the Reserve Bank Governor herself has indicated, inflation is now becoming something of a homegrown problem.
Yes.
And that being the case, of course, Australia didn't go hard enough with interest rates quickly enough to really try and crush that homegrown inflation. Now that that is an issue, which is something that's partly, the responsibility of government, because that comes down to wages policy, that comes down to other goods pricing in terms of supermarkets that you've already been talking about. It really is now a situation that the consequence of that is that interest rates will stay higher for longer for Australians as compared with many other parts of the world, with the United States expecting interest rate cuts as early as the first half of next year, whereas Australia might not see them until 2025.
I mean, this is also, though, a political problem for the Albanese government because, Anthony Albanese and his ministers can no longer blame COVID supply trends. They can no longer blame global factors. If, as you say, inflation is coming down faster globally than it is in Australia, if the RBA says that it's a homegrown problem now. What do you think the Albanese government needs to do to address this?
Well, it's partly going part of the way already, and effectively by really cutting some of the infrastructure projects or the funding for those infrastructure projects, but it really doesn't affect it all that much, because if it was actual projects that were simply not going to go ahead, that would take pressure off wages, that would take pressure off materials. But the fact is what they've done is cut, sort of grants that they were to give to the states. So the states are already committed to many of those infrastructure projects. They'll just go ahead and incur even more debt, and they're already cash strapped anyway, many of the states. But then on top of that, what the government is going to be very careful to do ahead of the next election is to not go out and provide enormous cost of living relief, which it will be tempted to do, because remember, its budget is in surplus right now. Now, it won't stay there forever, but the reality is that you understand for political reasons, this government ahead of the election is likely to spend more money to try and spend its way back into office. That is only going to add to inflation, and that is only going to add to this story that rates here, interest rates, will stay higher for longer.
Look, there's also this really interesting story in The Australian today by Tom Jucevic that this influx of 10,000 foreigners a week into Australia is hindering the RBA's ability to read inflation trends. Can you explain this to us?
Yeah, well, the fact of the matter is if you've got a lot of people coming to Australia, what do they tend to do when they come here? Well, they rent homes or they buy homes, and that adds to the pressure or the inflation of those homes. They then go and buy furniture, which again adds to inflationary pressure because it doesn't take demand out of the economy, it's adding to it. So while those people are being brought to Australia to add to our workforce to try and take pressure off wages, the reality is that the spending that they do when they arrive here, and even this includes foreign students who have got to set themselves up here in Australia, it actually adds to the spending, adds to the demand, and doesn't take the pressure off inflation, which is all that the Reserve Bank is trying to prevent by raising interest rates as high as they have. So this is the reason why its own picture of the strength of Australia's economy is in some ways really clouded by the strength of the number of migrants and the new people arriving here, and in particular that includes the foreign students that are coming to Australia.
Yeah, and you've mentioned that it contributes to this housing supply issue, particularly the rental crisis. But I mean, it also this high immigration path that the Albanese government has chosen, it to an extent it masks the true state of the economy, doesn't it, Ross? Because it technically keeps us out of a recession.
Oh, totally. And that's a good thing, right? We don't want to be in a recession. because that's not a great thing for the country as a whole. But the fact of the matter is, in many ways, we're being propped up by the spending and by the arrival of those new migrants. Now, long term, that's a good thing for Australia, there is no doubt. But do consider one other thing, and that is if you cast your mind further forward, what happens when you bring in these people is you need more infrastructure. But remember right now what I said, the government's trying to cut back on infrastructure spending. So that causes pressure in other parts of our society. And so if you want more people in the economy, you need more electricity, you need more roads, you need more transport, you need more water for all of those people and more housing. And the reality is right now it's very hard to be able to build that housing because with interest rates where they are, you don't know quite where it's going to end.
Yeah.